I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting for the City of Springdale for March 5th, 2025. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Browder, if you could take roll.
Mr. Gleaves.
Present.
Mr. Jacobs.
Present.
Ms. McFarland.
Present.
Mrs. Salvo-Meiska.
Present.
Mr. Vanover.
Present.
Mrs. Webster.
Present.
Mr. Anderson.
Present. Council, next on the agenda is the minutes. In your packet, you received the minutes from the February 19th meeting. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as published signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? I abstain. The minutes are approved with 6 affirmative votes and 1 abstention for Mr. Vanover. All right, next up we have a presentation on the one-way street parking study that was done by Tech Engineering. This is related to ordinances that we have coming up, as well as a public hearing that will be later on our agenda, but we thought it'd be good to level set before any of that with an update and an overview of the work that was done going into this. So,
good evening. My name is Ed Williams with TEC Engineering. So the study that we did, we began as a parking study to take a look at the neighborhoods in that area and look at the safety of the two-way streets and the parking. So ultimately what we did is we looked at the potential for maintaining the two-way operation, as well as looking at options for one-way movement on the streets. So the project area, we looked at the available parking and looked at the site distance in those areas. These are, we kind of basically looked at, well, there's about 119 legal parking spaces on Ledro and about 61 legal parking spaces on Castro, just to kind of give an idea. From there, then we started to look at stopping site distance. Because of the parking plus the horizontal and vertical curves, there are some areas of concern as far as 2 cars, and you can see in the diagram there what stopping site distance is. And it's basically you identify an object in the road and you are able to stop. And if it's one way, it's 155 feet. If it's two way, then it's double that, because both cars have to identify the object and see. And so from there, we began looking at areas where the parking may need to be restricted if the two-way was maintained. And these are kind of the areas between the parking and the horizontal and vertical curves and some of the intersections along there where that site distance is difficult. And as I go through the pictures, you can kind of see some of these in the area where the parking and the horizontal curves around the bend make it difficult to see. And you can kind of see there's some, S curves in some of those locations. And so with that, that would, if we took out those, that would be about 20 parking spaces in order to meet that site distance, in order to make those streets work. So then, we looked at the other option, which is potential one-way alternatives in those sections to be able to maintain the parking. Obviously, on-street parking, from my experience, is always critical. It just seems like there's never enough parking in those areas. So we did look at multiple different options, including different options for Ledro and Castro, with one-way alternatives in one direction, and with Castro in a counterclockwise direction, or Ledro in a counterclockwise direction, Castro in westbound. Obviously in the other direction. And then finally, we looked at a kind of a middle ground where we kept a two-way operation, but did like a one-way pair on the 2 streets. I will mention up around Tivoli, that still does create some issues, some site distance issues, so that still would result in some parking removal around that. In addition to all of this analysis, we did look at, well, what does that mean, first of all, for length of travel? Because obviously, if it's one way, it takes you longer to get, ultimately, let's say the destination is up to Crescentville. So we looked at travel time, and obviously it's an average, but it would basically increase travel time on average, and again, it's an average, of about 15 seconds. So if you, on average, if you left your house, traveled and wanted to get to Crescentville, it would on average result in 15 seconds. The people farther away from, at the beginning of the one-way start would have to travel longer, obviously, and the people closer wouldn't. But that's what we looked at. And then also, with the one-way options, it does increase, depending on which way was selected, it could increase traffic on Benedier. So we did do an analysis up at Benedier and Crescentville, assuming that a lot of the traffic from Tivoli would have to move over to Benedier, and it still operates at an acceptable level of service. And so that was the study quickly, and I can take any questions.
Yeah, and just to level set as we're here, the point of doing the presentation at this point of the agenda was just to give some information before we get into regular communications in the public hearing. So this was simply to level set, just because I believe there's a lot of public interest in the study that was done specifically. I appreciate you going through all this, and I believe there would be an opportunity, and I know there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions inside the ordinances. So I think just as a process side, I'd like to hold off questions for the study itself until we get into past the public hearing and start having the discussion about the actual change, if that's all right, if you can hang out.
Perfect.
And just for the people in the audience that might not be as familiar with our meetings, first, welcome to a City Council meeting. We're glad you're here. If you're here for or to speak on the proposed ordinances in the public hearing related to this study, the one-way street changes, that is on our agenda. There will be a public hearing specifically for that. That'll happen coming up right after general communications from the audience. So you'll be sure to have that opportunity. So there's a special public hearing where you have an opportunity to speak your mind and share your views and ask questions. And that'll happen before we do our internal deliberations up here on if we should make the change or not. So that'll happen inside of item number 8 in our ordinances. But thank you, Mr. Williams, for giving us some level set on the parking study that was done. Before we get to the ordinances, let's continue with our agenda. The next thing on our agenda is item number 6, which is communications to council outside of that. Ms. Browder, are there any communications for council this evening?
Thank you, Mr. President. No communications.
All right. Next up on the agenda is communications from the audience. This is an opportunity for general communications with council. This is not specific to the public hearing. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience that would like to address council for any reason. You have the opportunity to do that now simply by coming up to the podium, state your name and address, sign in, and then you'd have up to 5 minutes to speak to council. And this is on any topic that is of interest to you. There will still be an opportunity for the public hearing specific to the Tivoli change after this. So at this point, the floor is open for communications from the audience if anyone would like to address council. Second call. Third and final call. All right, at this point, I'm closing communications from the audience, and we can move into ordinances resolution. We've now come to that point that I promised would happen, and that's the public hearing. So at this point, we do have a public hearing on our agenda tonight, and this is related to ordinance number 8, 2025, and ordinance number 9, 2025. There'll be one public hearing related to both of the ordinances. So at this point, if anyone would like to address council and share your thoughts for or against ordinances number 8 and number 9, this is your opportunity to do that. After this public hearing, council will then read the ordinances and then deliberate and make a decision. So at this point, the public hearing is open for ordinance number 8, 2025, and ordinance number 9, 2025. Again, simply come to the podium, state your name and address, and share your thoughts. The floor is now open. And again, in order to keep the meeting moving along, you have up to 5 minutes to share your opinions, and then we can extend as needed.
I'm Ron Ball. I live on 97A Tivoli. Been there for over 40 years. I know I have called the police before where they park. We're like in a cul-de-sac. I'm there in the corner of Tivoli, and they park right in front of my house. And I've had to call the police 6 times in a row, like every half an hour. And finally, the lazy-ass police finally come over. And after that, I noticed that my phone will no longer, this number will no longer let me go to the Springdale police it switches me to Hamilton County Dispatch. But I've had other friends, I said, would you mind making a call to the Springdale Police on this number, the direct number, and ask them just a question, and it rings right through for them. So it's almost like I got blocked because I keep calling about people parking in the wrong place over there. And I've called several times, no police show up. They just don't show up. But anyhow, the idea I have is, why can't we have parking permits? Parking permits would solve a lot of this. They'd have to be specific to the house, specific to the car. And I don't know, I know I did come over once and to the police to ask them about that. And the police chief, he wouldn't even come out and talk to me. He just hollered through the window, there's nothing we can do about that. And so I didn't appreciate that either. But if it was to the house and to the address, instead of these people, I mean, there was one house up the street from us, they have 6 cars, at least. And so they're about 5 houses up from us, and they just take up everything all the way down the street with their trucks and vans. So where I parked for 40 years, I can't even park there anymore because of them. I did talk to the building, let's see, somebody, Randy, I believe it was, and Randy said that there's really no way, he put it this way, he said it's extremely hard to enforce the occupancy. You know, he said that the L-shaped ranches like ours, it's supposed to be limited to 5 people. He said that is extremely hard. But if you did have the parking permits specific to the vehicle and the vehicle has to be registered at that address, you'd solve a lot of problems right there. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And I will share, we can certainly, as part of the public hearing, we can have a dialogue just so people understand. If you have questions or response, it's just like inside of our communications in the audience, just simply buzz in and talk. That was for council. Sometimes public hearings, they try to limit our responses until you've gone through all of them. I think it's important that we have a dialogue if there's a question. Like you brought up the point of permits. I can tell you, just so everyone understands, this ordinance originally came out of the Rental Program Committee, work that was done there. It was charged really with 2 things to work on. This started, I want to say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. The first thing was looking at building maintenance, property maintenance, especially focusing on the increase in rental properties. There was a thought that that might be affecting property maintenance and it wasn't being maintained, and we needed to look at our laws to see if we needed to strengthen things to make sure these landlords were maintaining properties just like the longtime residents were. And out of that work, we came up with the property maintenance and nuisance law, which has been very helpful for the city to work on that side of things. The second set of work that we focused on was around parking and traffic in the area. Because of the increase in tenants, we wanted to see if we were being good stewards and helping longtime residents, along with renters coming in, that they would be shared resources. And that's where this proposal came out of, was out of that. Inside of those meetings, we did have a lot of discussions about the idea of permits, permit parking. And I've told people that is still on the table. This set of changes does not restrict us from doing something like that. It could be in addition to or in place of. In those discussions around permits, the initial concern was really, it would have to be a limited number of permits, enough that it causes pain to the residents to then not want to park on the street, right?
We're in pain already.
I understand that. I feel that, and I live there too. I lived on Terrytown. I grew up on Terrytown. Mr. Vanover's back in that area. I feel it. I understand that. I also know that when I was there, growing up there, I had 3 brothers. So at one time on our little street on Terrytown, we had 5 cars at one point on one of the ranches, and there were just 4 of us in the house. So it's not limited to 10 people in the house. Sometimes that just happens. But to the permit question, that could happen also, and it is something that we can continue to look at. I can tell you this specific set of ordinances was thought of as a step to deal with the problem that came up when we were doing the research. We were looking at what the traffic and parking situation looks like, and as Mr. Williams mentioned from TEC Consulting, there's a couple dozen spots that were found to be unsafe as part of that research. So this set of changes is a way to address that and not make the problem worse, right? So we're sitting there as a group, right? So we're residents too, and we're thinking, how can we help? And then as we start to research it, we're like, oh no, we need to fix this. It's a safety problem we have to fix. So what we've done is might have made it a little worse for parking. And we're like, that's not good enough. We need to have an option. And that's where this came from, was this idea of,
As soon as you do that, they're all gonna be parking over on Tivoli and all the other places.
well, so this doesn't change, what this option does is not have us take the parking away that we're going to have to if we don't do this. And this isn't a done deal. I definitely I know I'm open to hearing feedback, especially from the residents affected. If we don't make these changes, we will have to remove 20 parking spaces from those streets, at least. So just understand, that's the decision point that we're working under up here, is which is better for the neighborhood, to move it to a one-way street in those sections. And we know that's not ideal, especially if people have lived there for 30 years, like the house on the corner is gonna feel the worst of it, right? And they've been there for 35 years, I think. So the question is, to us, is really, for this change, one-way street or remove 20-some parking spaces. The idea is this also then may help with the traffic, some of the flow problems, close calls people are having. So it's thinking it might help the traffic flow problem too. So that's just a level set, so you know, I've said too much. I have some lights and people that want to respond to you too. Mr. Vanover, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, just one of the things that when we were looking at permits, how do you treat visitors? We have company.
Well, other cities have did this. Like I used to work in Ludlow. If it was a commercial vehicle, of course, during the day, I mean, that was ignored. But if it sat there all night, then obviously they were living there.
Right.
So that's one way.
Yeah, well, but it's, you know, if we have, well, for example, we have Christmas Eve at our house, and I have, what, we use, thank God for my neighbor up street, because we'll use his parking spot, his driveway, to park our cars so that my in-laws and my brother and sister and family.
Were they there all night?
No, they weren't there all night.
Yeah.
But the point with the permits, if that spot's taken, that spot's taken. You know, and I get, and that's one of the things we wrestled with, enforcement.
The $100 ticket bring a lot of revenue
Well,
to the city.
I believe me,
You need revenue, don't you?
pain will change a mentality. But it's something that we talked about, and it's not off the table. But right now,
It would also help you know how many people are living in those rentals.
I don't disagree. I don't
If
disagree
they
at
come
all.
over here trying to register 6 vehicles, then you know there's 6 adults living in there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that was part of the first phase 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when we got into the nuisance category in legislation, because because I went through and counted, we are right at 25% rental in our neighborhood. And
I thought it was more than that.
well, it's actually down a little
gone down.
bit from what it once was. But it just, that creates a problem. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten a lot of help from the federal government. They took some of our muscle away in that we have limited reasons to go into a house.
That's what Randy told me. Yeah.
And that's, it frustrates me. You know, I've been there for 44 years. Yeah, 44 years. So I feel the pain with everything else. And as a matter of fact, this morning, headed to the rec center at 9 o'clock, there was a van coming down Lead Row, and he was taking his half in the middle.
Yeah.
And he, by law, has to yield, but that wasn't going to happen. I bailed into a driveway apron rather than get my car crashed.
Right.
And I'm not the only one. I know several
I've
of
been
my
sideswiped 5 times.
Yeah. It's part of the problem is the neighborhood was built in the 60s. If you had one car, you were doing well.
You were doing good.
2 cars, you know, you were playing golf on
Yeah.
Wednesday with the doctors. Now, that's not the case. And the size of the cars are wider. And part of the problem is exacerbated with that size when somebody parks with their rear end or their front end out away from the curb, then they just restricted that lane of travel too. And there's part of it, a big part is better driving habits and common courtesy. But unfortunately, not everybody plays by those rules.
Right.
And we
Tickets
have,
help that.
That's, well, you know, that's the reason why we have speed limit signs.
Yeah.
You know, if everybody,
They don't pay much attention to that. unless
well,
it's absolute.
that's true, and you look at the number of tickets that we have to write because of that. So it's one of the things that has grown. It's not totally unique to our neighborhood, but we are feeling the crunch the greatest and first right now. And it will visit, there are other areas in Old Springdale and the Terrace that they're dealing with the same thing. And this is, has been kind of our move that, okay, we have to do something. And this is, you know, what we've come out with to be the least painful. If we have to take 20 cars off the street, where are they going to go?
And we'll
You
get to
know,
that.
that's the reality. I mean, if they're residents' cars, where are they going to go? We have short driveways. We have narrow driveways. That, you know, is a geographic, plus the topography of our neighborhood. I'm down on Tavel, we're at the low point. Well, if I head east on Ledrow, I do the S-turn by Colegroves and by the park, and now I've got an elevation change. I'm gaining elevation. Well, I noticed today there weren't but maybe 3 or 4 cars on the street, but there were 2 cars in driveways. I still couldn't see that curve ahead of me. To Tivoli to Ledrow, the same situation. Our bend down there,
Right.
They use gravity to slingshot themselves around.
Yeah.
So it's, and Castro's the same way. And in all honesty, when we started this, I looked at Ledrow primarily well, once we got the study and you saw the picture there, Castro parallels that S-turn just like Ledrow does. So it's one of those things that it's built, it's, you know, what we're stuck with that. We can't move, you know, utilities. Our poles are right on the back of the curb.
Right.
Fire hydrants are on the other side, so what do we do? And this is where we've kind of sit down and said, okay, this is.
Well, I don't disagree with the one way, but I think we could use a lot more enforcement. I mean,
And that's a
because
good
I don't
note.
see any enforcement.
And we can work on that. And I want to make sure we give everyone a chance to talk tonight. I definitely we took that note in terms of enforcement, and that's a good call out too. Mayor Hawkins, did you want to respond to that as well before we move on?
Thank you. Mr. Ball, first, thanks for coming out. I think there's 3 main issues that this comes down to in this situation, and in general, they're trying to be addressed. The one is safety, and Mr. Vanover's been talking about those safety issues for over a decade. The other is parking, and the third part's quality of life. And there's a lot of different things that have contributed to the overparking and the more congestion. A lot of it has nothing to do with the folks that are living right there in those houses. Some of it is parking that's been pushed from another entity.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of moving parts trying to go through there. In terms of the quality of life, that's important. And I want you to know, and everybody should know, in terms of enforcement, the edict's gone out to the police department that we do want quality of life enforcement with regard to parking, people parking in the grass, on yards, blocking driveways, those kinds of things. Our officers aren't going to be able to be everywhere. They're not going to catch every speeder. They're not going to catch everybody who's doing something wrong. Please call up like you're doing. If you see something, call up. Know that, and while I understand it's frustrating when you don't see that result take place, but call up, give the data. Folks are going to do what they can, but I want you to know that administratively, we've asked police to be focused on that in that area. So every place within our city has different issues going on. In Heritage Hill, we dealt with the individual with the nails, and the enforcement there with regard to patrols and everything else was more than it probably had ever been, because they're trying to manage that. And even with that, it's not going to be perfect. People are still going to get nails, and people still are going to have issues there. But know that that's something that we're trying to go through and do. So if you see something, call up, give the information so we can try to go and address that.
45 years ago, they were right on it.
Yeah.
Now they're not too fast.
Thanks.
They may have other issues, but
We appreciate the feedback.
Thanks. And Mayor Hawkins, to that comment of calling in, it is not the practice of Springdale in any way to block numbers. I do know that it does roll over automatically if the clerk
well,
is on a
I
call.
hope that's an anomaly.
And I just want to make sure that we didn't run by that. I know that if you do end up getting rolled to the Hamilton County Dispatch, it's usually because the clerk in our office is unavailable or on another call, and it automatically rolls over to that. So if they're on a call, that's might have been what you had seen. But I'm confident it's not our practice to do that. And I'm seeing a lot of.
Correct.
Okay. I
So
hope so.
if you do find that that's an issue, let us know. We'll look into it. But I want you to be
I
confident.
gave up calling.
Well, if you see something, you're allowed to say something. If you're having trouble with that, that's a separate issue we can take offline. But thank you for coming out and sharing
Okay,
your thoughts.
great. Thank you.
All right, so the floor is still open for the public hearing. Be sure to sign in if you haven't. We need to keep a record.
My name is Don White. I live at 923 Ledrow. I've been here for 40-some years. And what is the problem? That street's been there ever since I've been here. Has there been a lot of wrecks on it? Has there been people killed on it? I mean, it don't make sense to make it a one-way. Make it a one-way and you see my jacket, you're gonna have a racetrack. You got one now. There's 2 or 3 cars down at the end of Ledrow that fly up there. If I was able anymore, I'd still throw my garbage can out in front of them. I did it when I first moved there, and the guy stopped running fast. But I can't see no problem with it. Has there been a lot of accidents?
So thank you for the comments, Mr. White. I can tell you the primary reason that this was proposed was to prevent 2 things. One was to prevent the elimination of 20-some parking spaces on those 2 streets that would make the parking problem more difficult. Those have to be removed for safety reasons if we don't make the change. So that's the first reason. The second one was that, as Mr. Vanover was stating, was to start to address some of the problems with people driving and the size of cars and the number of cars and the speed. The thinking is that this might also help with that problem. But those were the reasons that we were looking at this. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. That's why we're talking about it.
I mean, are we gonna get enough money up from taxes to pay for my gas? That's gonna be extra for me to drive out of there? Huh? I mean, it's just doesn't make sense. You're gonna have a speed trap or a speed if you make it one way.
Well, and that's a good point. For people who didn't review the TEC study, the TEC report that you saw presented tonight, the point that you just raised about concern that it might raise speeds in that area, that was one of the issues that TEC Consulting shared as a concern. If the city does do this, there is some concern that it could increase the speed on those streets. So what you're bringing up is a fair point, and it's something that the engineers also highlighted to council to consider. Again, it's balancing those ideas, the parking versus potential for speed versus enforcement. But thank you for the comments. Did anyone else want to address that?
That's it.
All right, thank you. The floor is still open. Thank you, Mr. White.
Hello. My name is Lori Aubrey Heckman. I live at 1000 Tivoli. And I want to say first, on his comments, that I feel like he wasn't answered. He asked a valid question. Why is this being done? Have there been a ton of accidents?
No.
So this is just a prevention of what? Something that's not been happening. That doesn't make sense at all.
So,
So
again,
if it's not broke, don't fix it.
again,
I
it's not,
mean, right?
it's not just about accidents. The concern that we're talking about is the removal of parking spaces on that street that's already is very congested.
But you're not going to remove parking spaces if you do one-ways.
Correct. But if it stays two-way, then we need to remove those spaces that are already there. So right now, there's
Okay.
about 20 spots on those streets that are going to have to be marked no parking if we don't change it to one-way because of the sideline. So that's honestly, that was the primary driver of what we're talking about here. The idea of permits and these other ideas, those are still things that we're talking about to address
Okay.
the number and audience that are being brought up. Those are good points. The reason we're talking about this tonight is to avoid, we have to take action. We either have to take the spots away or switch to one-way. There's no in-between right now for that decision point. Ms. Sullivan
Okay,
Westcott,
well,
did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, when we went, and I was also in the committee, and the main thing that we had said was we wanted to have the least impact on you guys, and with a 15-second difference, I believe, was it 15 seconds?
Averages.
Yeah, averages of 15 seconds difference, we felt that that was the least amount when we looked at all the different options, because no matter what, because we had them come out and do the engineering report, we don't have a choice. We either take away those spots and keep it two-way, or we make it one-way, and that's what we're deciding today. We have not decided on one-way. We have not decided on two ways. That's why we have everybody out here. We want to know, do you want one-way? Do you want two-way? If you have two-way, do you understand that those spots are being taken away?
Why are they taking them away?
Because it's unsafe. We, at the beginning, we had a presentation from Mr. Wood, and he came out and he explained that when they did the engineering,
Hang on a second, sorry, just in terms of how the meeting has to progress, we have to maintain a record of what's being talked about, so we can't have people in the audience shouting out questions. I appreciate your question, Mr. Wright. I understand that, Mr. White,
Yes.
but we will get to that. I understand
Sure.
that. We'll bring that up, and we'll
Absolutely.
do that, but I'm just asking, please, we can only have one person talking at a time, and they need to be at the podium so we can get it for the recording. But we understand the question. So the question was around
Yeah.
parking.
No, you're
Ms.
fine.
Sullivan Westcott, please, continue.
Basically, what I was saying was that we're trying to have the least amount of impact and the least amount of negative impact, because even if we haven't had a whole bunch of accidents yet, the fact that it's been identified, if there is one accident, it's over. We're not allowing that to happen on the city's watch with us knowing there's a problem there. If we leave it there, we're at fault for the accidents. If we fix it, we're not. So right now what we're looking at is we need to fix this.
Okay, well, I know that I've sent you messages
Yes.
before, and I know that I've talked to other people
Yes.
about the bigger problem here, and that's what Ron talked about.
Yes.
There are several families living in these houses. The house right next to us, 1014, had 15 cars over a 6-month period. They were moving out in the middle of the night. They were moving in and out in the middle of the night.
Yeah. And I said,
Okay?
I saw
They don't
that.
speak any English, and that's another problem with the traffic laws. They don't understand the traffic laws.
Okay.
Bus drivers, that is one of my biggest things. I'm a nurse. I want to sleep in because I work 12 hours. So when I leave, now I need to leave 10 minutes earlier because this one bus driver at 6:30 in the morning comes and stops in the center of the road. I understand that's for the safety of the kids, but when I'm up there and she can pull over, she won't. And she tries to come past me when I'm the one in the right of way. That's another problem.
Yeah.
But these houses that have multiple families is totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
We came home from Indianapolis 500 one year, and I have video of it. He had to pull in the driveway with the camper. I had to park in my yard. The entire street was filled. Nowhere to park. All night long, all weekend long, because we watched it on our cameras.
Yeah.
We had someone hit our car in the house next door. Guess what? That van disappeared.
I specifically brought up your situation when we were in this meeting, when we were talking about permits.
There's a lot of
Specifically,
illegal
yeah.
stuff going on.
Right now, what we're dealing with is one-way or two-way. That's what's in front of us today, and that's the only thing that we could deal with today.
Okay.
I fully understand and I hear what you're saying. Trust me, I do. But what I'm saying is that right now, what we are taxed with is these two ordinances, which is one-way or two-way.
Okay.
And to be clear, the point of the public hearing is to get the feedback, and I appreciate the concern that you have. The other issues that you brought up are probably more likely to be addressed with the permit system and some changes in that area. Again, this doesn't prohibit that from happening. We're doing things one step at a time. But because the safety issue was identified where these spots have to be removed, we have to take action on that first, right? And then the permit question and how do we address that, over occupancy, those are all things that this doesn't prevent that from happening.
Right. Well, one other thing that my husband had said, if you guys do this, you're going to put a lot more traffic on Tivoli.
That's true.
Because they're going to come from Ledro around and come up Tivoli to go to the light to turn left. And then same with these people down here. Why not?
Well, let's one step at a time. So that concern, that's why it's a good question.
And
so
the people coming this way, one way, are going to come around. I mean, they're going to come around this way too to go up that way.
Right, which is why that's why we asked TEC Engineering to look at traffic flows and patterns to see, based on the number of trips and the cars, what that would do. I agree, that was a concern we had too, is what does it do to those cars? One of the things we also talked about is, is the lighting correct, right? Even now that we're changing the way that people are exiting to, say, Crescentville, we just recently added that light at Crescentville on the side, and then there's the other one at Ledro. So now our car's going to be trying to turn left from the middle street that doesn't have a light, and what's that going to do? And that was all looked at in the TEC study. So I agree
They're all
that's
going
a
to come
concern.
onto Tivoli Lane.
I think that's what the study showed, but I'd have to go back and look.
And then same, I meant to say they'll be coming down Tivoli to
Right.
go back up Castro.
Yes, on the
So
Castro
that's a
side.
lot of traffic for us.
It is, but understand, this isn't Kemper Road, right? We're still just talking about the car. The only reason the cars are back here is because they live back here or are visiting somebody back here, right? This isn't a throughway. So the number of cars is limited, and I think the TEC study showed that. Again, I'm here to hear the concern. So I hear your concern. I'm still trying to understand the impact. So thank you for sharing that. Did anyone else want to respond to that? Again, it's good feedback, and it's what we're looking for tonight. Thank you. All right, the floor's still open?
Good evening. My name is Chuck Rink. I live at 975 Castro Lane. I know a lot of concerns around where we live, mimic a lot of what these people have been saying about the number of vehicles in certain locations and things like that. We've all seen that. But looking at the possibility of moving to a one-way on some of these streets, I can see the advantage. It eliminates some of the congestion going both directions and stuff. Where I live, I'm at the top crest of a Castro. There have been several accidents right there because of the two-way. And they have all been caused by excessive speed from one of the vehicles. Putting one-ways on these streets is going to turn them into a racetrack. Many of the vehicles that come through in the early evenings, late evenings, they don't care about the speed. The only reason they slow down is because of the possibility of an oncoming vehicle. If they know they have one way free or right, their speed is going to increase drastically. And that's where it's going to have possibly even more accidents. Or depending on what it is, because we go into summer, the kids are out later, we may have somebody being hit, which really hasn't happened yet, fortunately. So that's one of our big concerns, looking at the one-way direction. A couple other concerns that I've noticed, and probably other people have, at the light at the top of Tivoli, when we have excess parking going in there, when you are coming into the neighborhood or trying to leave the neighborhood, you cannot access coming in. It's bad enough for vehicles, but when school buses do this, they block everything, or sometimes they can't even get in until the vehicles back up out of the way. So that's one of the aspects. I know down on the one end of Castro, they have put a sign up saying no parking from here to the corner. That's made a big difference right there.
Yeah.
You know, looking at something toward the lights or the other exits and entrances should be, you know, taken a look down, so it's a good possibility.
Yeah, and thank you for those comments. I can tell you the parking to intersections, to streets, was also in the discussions that we had. That's not what we were talking about in terms of parking spaces necessarily being removed. It's in addition to those. So we did, I know we've worked with administration, at least the committee did, and administration was prepared to put up some of those additional signs and make sure that no parking from here to corner is right. I know exactly the turn you're talking about from that light, because if those cars park up that hill, turning into it or out of it is very difficult because there's nowhere to queue for the light, and it ends up blocking people turning right from Crescentville into that street. Mr. Vandover, did you have a comment for that?
Thank you, Mr. President. You're right, but not only Tivoli, Benedict, the same situation coming off of Crescentville. If they're backed up to the corner, you've got no place to go. Turning on Tivoli off, or turn on to Ledrow off of Tivoli, you have to swing wide. So yeah, that's going to be another part. That's not necessarily part of this, but that's been a problem that has been identified, and they're going to, you know, remark that. I've come down and found cars sitting catty corner on the corner. And it's, again, part of this is if everybody had common courtesy, we wouldn't be having a lot of this discussion, right. But unfortunately we don't. And it, you know, it's the same scenario. There's a problem out there. We have to fix it. So, you know, here are our options that we've looked at, and you know, I drive through there every day, and it's, you know, there have been more near misses. I know several neighbors, you know, have had to bail in somebody's front yard or in a driveway because people were coming down. You mentioned school buses. I had one the other morning. They were picking up at Navona, and it's a handicapped child. Well, they were right in the middle, and I sit probably about 40 feet back because there was a gap there that they could get into. But it kind of irked me that me sitting back being courteous, I didn't even get a thank you wave. They just blew right on by. But that's we have traffic now, Amazon. That was not thought of, you know, in 1960. There's more of it out there, and that is part of the problem. You know, it's like Mr. Williams mentioned before about the sight distance. For a speed limit of 25 miles an hour, the minimum stopping distance is 155 feet. We don't have that in places. So yeah, I agree with you that the two-way calms that to some degree, but does it calm it enough to not? Because we will have to do this or pull parking spots. And, you know, you want to talk about a headache, then let's pull, well, we know of probably at least 20, maybe more parking spots that would be gone. And that's another exacerbation of a problem. So I feel you, and I think I understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, we can't go in and widen the streets and do all that to totally correct it, because somebody being here complaining that half of their front yard disappeared. Do that. Plus, we'd have to move utilities and everything else. And I know the interstate movement is about $1 million a mile.
That's right.
Ledrow is the longest street in the city, and it's a mile long. We don't have $1 million to go in there and completely redesign it.
Hang on, we need to keep comments to the podium, please. Thank you.
Again, thanks for coming out. The input is valuable. Thanks.
Again, thank you for coming in and sharing your concerns. The floor is still open.
All right, here I come. Okay, my name is Cosette Hunt, and I live down on 818 Ledrow. As far as taking the yard, you can have all my front yard and the side corner, okay? You can have all that if you need to make some room.
Thank you.
Man, whatever way y'all do, nobody's gonna be pleased. Nobody's gonna be happy. I don't care if you're making one way. I'm tired of getting almost taken out going up to Crescentville or even going up to Castro, going up towards like Chesterdale. But going up Ledrow, nope. Sometimes you can't even yield because it's all the cars there. So where you gonna go at? And then people don't know how to drive, and then you don't want to get over on the curb because there's so much trash over there with people done put out there that you don't want to run over it. And then back to the nail things, I done been the victim of that. So it's kind of hard, but I don't care if you're making one way, that's fine. I'll drive around the corner as long as I don't need no headlights coming at me. Because I don't have a monster truck. Believe me, some of them would be laying on the side somewhere because it don't make sense the way people don't respect, and they take the whole middle street, even though they got room over there to get over, they don't get over. They just, hey, I know I pay taxes on both sides of the street, but I got to give you some room to get by, so it's hard being down there down in Ledrow, it's just. And I was telling one of the members here that they got to do something, trying to get out to Tivoli, get out of Crescentville. You put the light there, they still fly through the light, so you got to sit there a minute to let the cars stop because between tractor trailers and these people in these white vans in a hurry to get to where I don't know where they're going. They about to take you out. I value my life. I don't know about nobody else, but, so. Whatever y'all do, I'm with it, but just make it safe. Put some speed bumps, but they'll fly over them too.
Well, we value your life too, but thank you for the comments. I will tell you, you did mention a comment about the nails and the way that people drive further away. I did want to share one of the things that another resident shared with me is when the nail problem was so prevalent in that area, that person and their friends started driving further away from the gutter, the curb, because they were afraid that's where they were picking up nails. Exactly. So some of that driving behavior might have been influenced by what was happening in the streets too, which made it worse. So it was a combination of storms that's making people come away from the curb because they think that's where it's being collected, debris. And so some of that was made worse by that as well. But again, thank you for sharing your feedback. All right, the floor is still open if anyone else would like to share comments in the public hearing related to these two ordinances.
Hi, my name's Paul New. I don't know, I get, you guys haven't done anything in our subdivision since they paved 20 years ago. The sidewalks, my wife fell 5 years ago walking the dog. She slipped in a mud where it ran off the house, down, broke her wrist. It cost more than our house cost to fix her arm, almost. It was within $10,000 of what our house cost. City didn't do anything. You can't walk up the street. Every house in the subdivision has at least 1 or 3 trip hazards. Mine didn't have any. They put a new gas line in, and now I have a trip hazard. You guys don't spend any money in our subdivision. I mean, you want to put up signs, you know, $10,000. You know, why don't you fix the sidewalks? Or, you know, you don't have $1 million to do the road. Do a section at a time. Widen the road. Take the little tree lawn out. Pour new sidewalks. Do 1 block a year. I mean, you know, so you spend $200,000. It's not $1 million. Over 5 years, it's $1 million. You know, why don't you widen it? I've had my say.
Well, thank you for the comments. I can tell you widening was talked about briefly, as well as cutouts was another option was discussed, at least briefly. These bailout points we talked about around utilities, an opportunity where you take part of that, I think they call it a hell strip or the berm or like that little outlot. And we did talk in the committee about maybe we build in some bailout spots for people when there's two-way traffic. Again, it was pretty cost prohibitive. To your sidewalk comment, one of the things that is different about Springdale is we do maintain sidewalks for the city, and there's a program for that. Most of the jurisdictions around us, it's up to the resident who lives in front of the sidewalk to repair it themselves. If you could, sorry, we need to make sure we hear it for the recording.
When we had to fix our aprons, they said that was our responsibility,
right.
And the sidewalk behind the apron was our responsibility. The rest of it was the city.
That's right. Right, so that's part of the driveway, but the actual sidewalk.
Yeah,
yes.
the sidewalk in front of the driveway
That's
is,
right.
because I'm going over it, I get that. But the sidewalk where the fire hydrant is and where the gas line comes into my house,
that's us.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's messed up because they bored under it and they used their little track hoe and they cracked the sidewalk and nobody ever fixed it. But I mean, you can't start at the corner of Tivoli and walk to Mallet without 30, 40 trip hazards from the tree roots, from our fancy trees that are growing like this.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't want a tree in front of my house. I'm 70 years old. I didn't want to mow around it, plus birds, But, I mean, you guys don't even replace the sidewalk. It's a mess.
So what I'll tell you is I know you can report sidewalk squares that are a problem, and Public Works will come out and take a look at those.
They came out and marked the sidewalks 3 or 4 years ago, and nothing ever happened. Nothing. Not one new block in 10 years.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just real quick, I know we do a constant evaluation of sidewalks. Mr. Miller is with us tonight from our Public Works Department, and I do believe we have some sidewalk grinding projects slated for 2025. I don't know in particular what streets those are on, but we have identified some areas in Heritage Hill to address those.
I mowed my neighbor's yard because she's old. Her sidewalk is, I mean, it looks like somebody took a sledgehammer to it, and, my riding mower throws rocks every time I mow it, so I quit mowing it.
Yeah, we are aware of some hazards over there. We're trying to identify those and get those remedied as quickly as possible. As far as the streets are concerned, I do know within the next couple years.
Why don't they do a block at a time? I mean, just start at the corner and replace the sidewalks a block at a time, or 300 feet. It's not that expensive.
So we do take
I work construction. It's not that expensive.
So we do take a systematic approach on how we repair streets, gutters, and sidewalks. And a lot of times we try and time that with other utilities. And I believe Waterworks is scheduled to do some line replacement in the Heritage Hill subdivision in the next probably 2 years. Mr. Miller, is that fair? That was their last estimate. That could get pushed one way or the other, but nonetheless, it is on a horizon here within the next couple years to to time that water replacement and then do the street project, gutters, and again, sidewalks as well.
The gutters, Adlita did a great job.
Yeah.
I mean, they really did. But, I mean, hell, 3 years from now, I'll be dead. I mean, I'm 70. By the time
Well, I hope not,
our
but-
subdivision gets something done,
Well, we care about you too, so we hope you make it more than 3 years. I'll say that, I do take your point about the sidewalks. I would often walk that with my mom too, when she was older, and I would worry in sometimes, so I was very vocal. I understand what you're saying about some of the sidewalks, and I know administration takes that seriously. So thank you for that feedback. Again, the public hearing for comments related to ordinance number 8, 2025, and 9, 2025 is still open, related to the possible conversion to one-way streets. If anyone else would like to address council, simply come forward, state your name and address, and we'd be happy to hear you.
Good evening, folks. My name's Tony White. No relation. I live at 1047 Castro Lane. And a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So I'm just going to hit on some highlights here. The one-way street thing, I do not like at all. I don't want to go this way to go this way. And I really don't think it's going to alleviate anything. You know, most of your traffic in the morning is going one direction, in the afternoon it's going another. One way's not going to help that. And Tivoli will get a lot of traffic. Look at that map. It's common sense. That's the quickest shortcut when you're doing a loop. And that 90-degree turn, that's the one that makes me nervous, guys, and I'm at the bottom of that road. That 90-degree turn can get a little hectic. Now, I've heard some horror stories about the other ones, and yeah, I've had some close calls coming down Castro from Chesterdale, but that one is a blind corner.
Oh, yeah.
And they can attest to that. That's where they live. The biggest problem here, honestly, is the language barrier. Because police officers don't want to do their job because they don't want to deal with the language barrier. And I'm being blunt about it. I'm calling a spade, I know that, but that's exactly what the deal is. If they're in our neighborhood, all they're doing is watching the four-way stop on Castro and Chesterdale. They're not patrolling through here. If you pull these people over and start giving them tickets for not doing the right-of-way, of, you know, giving me the right-of-way and pulling off on the side of the parked cars, you give them tickets for that. Instead of paying for a consultant, you guys could have made some money. Honestly, I don't mean to be blunt about it, but it's aggravating. It really is. And it's been an ongoing issue forever. I got a house across the street that I couldn't tell you how many people lived in it. And speaking of language barrier, it's had a shutter hanging on one screw for at least 2 years. Where's the building inspector on that? Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you, Mr. White, for sharing your comments. I will just, to your question about what it will solve, I'm not sure if you're here for the whole time. The primary driver for this change is to prevent the elimination of parking spaces. It's believed that it might also help with some of the other issues, but the real question is, what do residents prefer? What would be better? Is it one way or take away 20 spots?
Those 20 spots, that's 2 rental homes. I'm just kidding.
Right.
Do some kind of planning where those homes are going to lose a spot. Give them some kind of tax abatement or give them some kind of funding for a 2-car driveway.
So
it's that, I mean, just driveways aren't that expensive. You can get that knocked out for 10 grand.
And that's a good point that you brought up. That one thing I didn't mention that was brought up in the committee, depending on what steps we take, one option we did talk about is it possible for us to provide some of the residents in this area a grant program that will help offset some of the cost of those driveway expansions. There's some legality for what we can and can't do in that space, but that was something that was discussed and still can be discussed.
Yeah,
right? So
I
if we take the spots away, I can assure you that what we'll talk about is if we leave it 2-way, I'm confident the next thing we'll talk about in that committee meeting is, okay, now that the parking's even worse, do we need to now move on the permits? And do we need to look at the grant program to try to get some of those cars onto driveways instead? Because the estimate for adding like a side driveway it's in the order of about $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 to add a one-way spot. if the house can do it. So that is, it's a good point, and it's something that we will take seriously. So thank you for sharing that.
And ultimately, I don't even understand the elimination. I realize you're saying there's a hazard, and I don't live on those streets. I don't know who's getting hit, if anybody's getting hit. But this neighborhood is laid out no differently than one you'd find in Coleraine Township, Sharonville, or any other neighborhood. That's how they were laid out.
Right.
And cars, unless you got a pickup truck, are more narrow now than a 66 Buick. So
I understand that. So the safe sighting distances have changed, and the recommendations from the state that we have to resolve is what brings this up. This isn't just, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had better sight lines? There's very specific requirements that we have to conform to. Okay. And that's why when we say we've identified those spots, it's not that, Councilmember Vanover just drove over and said that's a problem. The engineers looked at the sight line, the elevation changes, and the visibility in those areas, and then identified the areas where those signs would have to go. So it's more than just a, hey, this doesn't feel safe. I just want to make you understand it's not. It wasn't done lightly.
I came from Xenia, so I was a little late, so I appreciate that.
You're fine.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, it wasn't done lightly. The floor's still open.
My name is Nick Smith. I live at 11970 Navona Court. I only have one car, so I'm not worried about the 20 parking spaces. I'm dead set against the one-way streets. I've lived here far too long, over 60 years, to be changing now. I worry about I only have one car in the car, so I don't have to worry about anything. But I worry about the 3 cars that are parked where there should be 2, like in front of the stop sign where we come out, and then the other cars that are blocking. So my line of sight, I can't see. I have to creep out. That's one of the problems. But I'm thinking usually, to widen the curbs, you want a suggestion, take a look at Chesterdale. Yeah. That's the road you want to look as more of an ideal if you want to save those parking spaces. Just maybe put a couple divots in there and for 2 cars to park, and maybe you might save some parking spaces. I don't know what kind of money you would have, but the other guy was suggesting, a little bit at a time, 20 spaces, okay, 4 or 5 spaces a year, 5 years, might work. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Those comments, those are certainly things that we'll consider moving forward. The floor is still open. If anyone else would like to share thoughts related to the proposal, the ordinance number 8 and 9, 2025, to convert to one-way streets.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Tolke. My wife and I live on Mallet Drive, which is the middle one right there. And I am here not only representing myself, but also 8 other homeowners on Mallet. And the consensus for us is we are against the 2-way streets. When we got the letter, the first question I had, a lot of it has been answered, is it says there was a complaint brought to the city, right? I'm pretty sure that's what it says. Wasn't there a complaint that was brought about the safety in the letter that I received, right? And so I was like, well, how many people have complained and how many accidents have there actually been? I believe that's already pretty much been answered. The other thing, we know we'll lose 20 spots, and one thing I know a lot of people have a lot of vehicles. My neighbor across the street, he owns his own painting company, small business owner. He has like 5 trucks, it is what it is. He works hard, he gets up every day, he goes to work, he comes home to his family like everybody wants to do, so I have no problem with that. The one thing I would like to say though, I did notice in the traffic study, Wednesdays at 8 a.m., 8:15, there were 31 parked vehicles on Castro Lane. On Wednesday at 12:05 to 12:20, there were 24. There was only 7 vehicles vacated throughout the morning? So these vehicles just stay parked there all day, or they're coming and going? Okay, so they're coming and going throughout different times. All right, that makes a little more sense. We had questions about that. Sorry, he might have answered that in the survey. I was a little late. And so the other thing that we're kind of worried about, and it's brought up, was the speed. It already happens. We know that. And then also the traffic that will be forced onto Mallet and other areas like that, other roads outside the affected. So we're of the consensus that we would like to eliminate parking spots, or at least try to instill maybe some buffer zones. I think it's like 30 feet from stop signs. If we could do that on the other side of the road at the intersections, we think that would be better than going immediately to just the one-ways. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Turkey, thank you for sharing that. I will just add one comment. The comment about work trucks, one thing that I thought was interesting in Springdale is for a long time, I want to say back about 7 years ago, we changed the rules. There was a period of time where in Springdale you could not park your work truck in your driveway, and you were required to park it in the street, which was, that it didn't make sense based on our community and how it's used. So it was just making parking worse. So that was a change that they can now park in the driveway. There's still people in Springdale that think they can't. So the only reason I mentioned is thank you for bringing that up. You are allowed to park some of those trucks, depending on what it is, in your driveway before it's prohibited.
I have no problem with that. One other thing, sorry, I did think, maybe better parking enforcement, right? So I noticed on the recent snow emergency, there were vehicles that were parked there the entire time, right? And since Aaron and I, my wife had moved in a little over a year ago, I walked the dogs around, and there are vehicles that have not moved since I've gotten there. And to the police's credit, there was one that ended up in front of my house. It had sat there for a while, talked to all the neighbors. Do you know whose it is? No. Then the tags expired. I made a call. An officer was out within 20 minutes. We had the situation resolved. So, I mean, I know you guys are working, and I know you're paying attention to our concerns, and I do appreciate you giving us this forum to come out here and express our concerns. But I'm a little worried, and we believe on Mallet that the one-way might just be too quick of a knee-jerk reaction. We'd like to possibly explore other options, eliminate parking spaces before we go to that. I understand it may be needed eventually, but hopefully not right away. So I do appreciate your time.
And that's a good call out. That's certainly something for us to think about. If we don't make that change tonight and take the parking spaces away, it does not prohibit us from going back and doing that. Now, we would have to wait 90 days before we could bring that ordinance up again based on council rules. But if it doesn't pass tonight, we could take the spots away and then make that say, okay, now we see what the pain is and that we want to try this. None of those things that we do tonight are permanent and can't be undone. So thank you for that feedback and those points. The floor is still open if anyone else would like to address council related, for the public hearing related to the two ordinances. Second call. Third and final call to speak on the public, for the public hearing. All right, I'm closing the public. I'm sorry, Mayor Hawkins, did you have a comment to make before we close the hearing?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just briefly, there was a young lady who lives over on Terrytown who had sent the administration in a letter, and the members from the rental committee got it. But I want to make sure council's aware that she also wanted to make sure that council knew that she did not want a one-way, and she had some concerns with regard to just being able to get around and the inconvenience there. She also has a sister that's living in Heritage Hill and saw that as sort of a hardship for her. So I want to make sure the rest of council was aware. I know the rental committee members are aware that you have another two individuals that do not want it one way. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're still in the public hearing, not doing deliberations specifically. The floor is still open under the wire. Again, this is for the public hearing related just to ordinance number 8 and 9.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Daniels, and I'm at 12095 Chesterdale Road. What impact will this have on fire and the EMT if you do the one-way?
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. That's a great question. We neglected to mention that as part of this ordinance, the committee did speak with administration about the impacts to public safety, both police and fire. They responded on response times and concerns about that, and they weren't found to be a significant impact at all. But they were consulted, both the chief of police and the fire chief were both part of those discussions. I will also say that there were questions that were raised about what this would mean for schools in terms of busing, Rumpke in terms of trash pickup, post office in terms of the way that they do their routes, and those things are all being considered. If it were to pass, it would likely wait to be implemented after the school year was done, but that would all be worked out. But those were part of the discussions too. Mayor Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Daniels, do you have an opinion one way or another with regard to the one-way, two-way?
You're making her come all the way back, because I've said it enough times, she knows.
Sorry,
Thank you, Ms.
you got
Daniels,
back too fast.
for coming back up.
I'm on Chesterdale, and I'm tired of getting my cars hit on Chesterdale. So if one way is gonna cause a problem for the other residents in that area, I'm up for just eliminating the parking spaces, see how it goes. You said 90 days, you can bring it back, see how it goes, and then look at some other alternatives.
Yeah. All right, thank
They
you for
do
sharing.
fly
those.
up and down that street. So.
Thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts. Ms. Webster, is this related to the public hearing?
Yes, I'd like to make comment. Excuse me. Unless I'm reading this audience wrong, it seems to me that most of you that have spoken are against this. Is that correct? Nod?
Well, they can't
I
respond.
feel like maybe we should take another look at this and do something different. I don't like to do things that the residents of all these years aren't happy with. And I just feel strongly about that. So maybe we can do something, look at something different. I wasn't on that committee, but I would have liked to been, I think. But I know that it's hard to drive over there. We got streets over on this side, about 8 that I could name right now that need to have something done. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we should look at it again. Thank you.
All right, so we're still in the public hearing. If anyone else in the audience would like to speak in the public hearing, this is your second call before it's closed. Third and final call before the public hearing will be closed. All right, at this point, I'm closing the public hearing related to ordinance number 8 and ordinance number 9, 2025, and we will move on with the agenda. The next on the agenda is ordinance number 8, 2025. We've had the public hearing, and this is the second reading and can be acted on tonight. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready, please read the ordinance.
Ordinance number 8, 2025, an ordinance to establish Castro Lane as a one-way street between Benedict Road and Ledrow Street. Whereas the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio is committed to ensuring the safety and efficiency of vehicular and pedestrian traffic within the city, and whereas changes to the flow of traffic on Castro Lane were discussed and reviewed by the Rental Program Committee established by Council, and whereas after a comprehensive traffic study and input from traffic engineers, it has been determined that converting Castro Lane into a one-way street will improve traffic flow and safety conditions, and whereas the conversion of Castro Lane to a one-way street is in the interest of public safety, pedestrian accessibility, and overall traffic management of the city. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1. Castro Lane shall be designated as a one-way street in the westbound direction between Benedict Road and Ledrow Street, effective upon the installation of appropriate signage and traffic control devices. Section 2. The Department of Public Works is hereby authorized to install all necessary signage and road markings to implement this change in the direction of traffic on this street. Section 3. Any vehicles traveling in a direction contrary to the designated one-way direction shall be subject to penalties as prescribed in the city's municipal code. Section 4. Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 5. This ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 8, 2025. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. At this point, we have the opportunity for discussion between council members. If there's any other questions or discussion from council related to this ordinance. Before we get into that, I did want to say something I neglected to say before, which was a thank you to Mr. Vanover and Ms. Megan Sullivan-Wisecup, who were on the committee that brought it this far. The reason I mention it is that public hearing that we just had is not required by Ohio law. It's something that the committee felt very strongly. We wanted to get feedback from the community, rather than just thinking we knew what was best and going after it. So thank you for being willing to do that and making sure that we got that voice of the public during the ordinance. Is there any questions or discussion related to the ordinance from council? Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we have any numbers on the number of accidents, maybe over the last year or 2 years? Do we have any of that information?
Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. There was a conversation we had with the police department. They had no significant auto accidents in those areas, but there are plenty stories with similar to the residents have shared tonight on a bunch of near misses and a bunch of bailout concerns. Although there was I think one of the issues, or one of the auto accidents was a single vehicle accident. And I think there may have been alcohol involved as a contributing factor. But most of the stories that we have heard from residents and issues back there have been the near misses and non-contact.
Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for everyone that came out. I've spent some time over in this area months ago and recently. The thing that I'm concerned with is the fact that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's still out there. And I agree with Ms. Webster that there is some gaps here. I feel that there's just a lot of people that have lived there for years. That's you know, I think that your tenure means everything. I have problems with, and respect also for these studies that municipalities do, but it does a disservice when there's not a communication between the community and the people who's actually doing the presentations and studies and things of that nature. It's difficult, but I just like the fact that the tenure means a lot to me, and that means that you stayed here. You could have moved, but you like where you're at, and there's no better person or people to let everybody know what is present than the people that've been there. So I just want to say that I think that there's some more things that need to be looked at, and hopefully we can get to that point, but that's what I think needs to happen. So thanks again for coming out. Appreciate that.
Any other questions or discussion? Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're aware that the other alternative to changing the direction is the removal of 20 spots. Those spots have been identified. My question to admin is, has there been outreach to residents living near where those spots would be removed? Because I feel like that's a piece of the puzzle. If we don't do the direction change, then there's that other piece of how the 20 spot removal would affect these residents.
Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a good question, and that is step 2. So if this doesn't move forward, then we would engage those residents to let them know, and we would go out and mark those spaces to have a visual of what that would look like, and then also let those residents who are impacted know that those parking spaces would potentially go away.
Thank you.
Which also creates bailout spots for what it's worth in those areas, right? By the nature of the spots being open. Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I think everybody coming out tonight, we need to also remember that there are over 520, almost up 550 homes in that. You heard a voice here, but that non-existent voice speaks to. You know, I don't know. I mean, the committee has spent, well, over a year on this. I don't know how many more avenues that you can come up with to do. I mean, if they want to pull the 20 parking spots, so be it. Honestly, I'm not sure that that's going to be the end all, but if that's the case, then, you know, that's what we'll do. But, you know, just also remember that we've heard this voice, but there's also a voice of those people that didn't come out, didn't see the need for it. So, you know, we have to listen to both.
All right. Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have family that live over there, so I've been in those situations many, many times. Have we considered, or would it be an option if we were to stay 2A and take away a lot of those parking spots where there's those safety concerns, also adding speed bumps or something where those major safety issues are, doing almost a double step to try and address those concerns?
So I can say in terms of traffic calming, that's a separate issue that addresses speed. The calculation for what spots have to be removed is simply visibility and the speed that's permitted on that street. I mean, there is also the option to reduce the speed on the streets. You could make them 10-mile-an-hour residential, 20-mile-an-hour residential. You can reduce the speed in other ways, which would then free up some spots. Those are options. But traffic calming devices were only talked about in one meeting that I recall. We looked at different options, including jagged, like offsets. There's these jog ideas. We talked about cushions and bumps. But the problem that we were trying to solve was really visibility for the parking spaces. It wasn't about speeding. So the committee's focus was not on speeding, which is why we didn't get into too much of that. That would be a separate item that could be discussed. And it wouldn't have to be done through the rental program committee. That was the only reason this came up through that committee is because the report that we did identified the safety issue we had to address then.
Gotcha.
But if we want to talk about traffic calming in the neighborhood, that's a different discussion that we could talk about outside of this ordinance.
Yeah, I'd mention it because I don't disagree. If you make that one way, I think speed will be a factor. I live on a much wider road, 2 houses down from the stop sign, and cars are easily 25, 30 miles an hour by the time they get in front of my house. And there have been multiple accidents in front of my house. So I feel for all of you guys. I hate going to my brother's house because I don't want to drive down the street, but okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, it's certainly an option. Just whatever we do tonight for these ordinances doesn't mean we can't do other things, right? We can look at those things. We can go back to the drawing board. These ordinances were specifically, what do we think is more appropriate for the community and the residents have been there for parking spaces versus one-way street and what that impact looks like, which is why, I mean, that's the decision point tonight. Those other things are good discussion points too. All right, any other questions or discussion on ordinance number 8? All right, seeing none, Ms. Browder, if you'd poll council on ordinance number 8, 2025.
Mrs. Seldom-Weiskopf?
No.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
No.
Mrs. Webster?
No.
Mr. Jacobs?
No.
Ms. McFarland?
No.
Mr. Anderson?
No. Ordinance number 8, 2025 fails with 6 votes against, 1 vote for. Next, we'll move on to ordinance number 8, 2025. I'm sorry, ordinance number 9, 2025, an ordinance to establish Ledrow Street as a one-way street. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 9, 2025, an ordinance to establish Ledrow Street as a one-way street. Whereas the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio is committed to ensuring the safety and efficiency of vehicular and pedestrian traffic within the city, and whereas changes to the flow of traffic on Ledrow Street were discussed and reviewed by the Rental Program Committee established by Council, and whereas after a comprehensive traffic study and input from traffic engineers, it has been determined that converting Ledrow Street into a one-way street will improve traffic flow and safety conditions. And whereas the conversion of Ledrow Street to a one-way street is in the interest of public safety, pedestrian accessibility, and overall traffic management of the city. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, Ledrow Street shall be designated as a one-way street in the counterclockwise direction in its entirety, effective upon the installation of appropriate signage and traffic control devices. Section 2, the Department of Public Works is hereby authorized to install all necessary signage and road markings to implement this change. Section 3, any vehicles traveling in a direction contrary to the designated one-way direction shall be subject to penalties as prescribed in the city's municipal code. Section 4, Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 5, that this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 9, 2025. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion related to ordinance number 9, 2025? I will remind council that just because it's voted down tonight doesn't mean that we can't take it up again in the future. It does have a 90-day timeout, a wait period that's required by our ordinances. So if we go back and realize after we take the spots out, it's certainly something that we can explore again. All right. Any other questions or discussion on this ordinance? All right, seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council on ordinance number 9, 2025.
Mrs. Seldon-Weiskopf,
No.
Mr. Jacobs,
No.
Mr. Gleaves,
No.
Ms. McFarland,
No.
Mr. Vanover,
Aye.
Mrs. Webster,
No.
Mr. Anderson.
No. Ordinance number 9, 2025 is defeated 1 vote to 6. And again, I'll say, I do think it's an interesting idea that we may need to revisit in the future. I would encourage residents that weren't here tonight that are proponents of this, that I think it's important to show up and share those concerns, right? Just like the residents that came out and either ahead of the meeting, during the meeting, or after the meeting share those views on how we can make it better in the neighborhood. Don't wait until this last moment. Let us know if you have ideas, and we're certainly willing to hear those. So some of those other voices, I would love to hear from them for why they think it's a good idea, so that maybe we can tailor this better in the future. All right. All right, we'll move on now to ordinance number 11, 2025. This is a first reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 11, 2025. An ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Verdantis for preliminary design engineering for the Northland Boulevard and Kemper Road intersection modifications and shared youth path project. Whereas the city of Springdale, Ohio, the city is planning a modification project at the intersection of Northland Boulevard and Kemper Road, the project. And whereas the project will also include construction of a shared youth path consistent with the city's connectivity plan. And whereas the city has been awarded funding to offset the estimated cost for construction of the project. And whereas the city seeks to enter into an agreement with Verdantis for preliminary design engineering services related to the project. Now therefore be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Verdantis for completion of preliminary design engineering for the Northland Boulevard and Kemper Road intersection modifications and shared youth path project for the city of Springdale, the proposal. A copy of the proposal is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, the Finance Officer Tax Commissioner is hereby authorized to pay Verdantis an amount not to exceed $157,400 for completion of the Northland Boulevard and Kemper Road intersection modifications and shared youth path project preliminary design engineering as outlined in the proposal. Section 3, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 11, 2025. Is there any questions or discussion tonight? All right, seeing none, we will see this again at our next meeting. Next up, we have ordinance number 12, 2025. This is a first reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 12, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Marquee Engineering for design engineering for the Community Center HVAC Replacement Project Phase 2. Whereas the city of Springdale, Ohio, the city, is planning an HVAC replacement project at the Springdale Community Center, the project, and whereas requests for qualifications for design engineering services were received for the project, and whereas the city seeks to enter into an agreement with Marquee Engineering for professional engineering services related to the project. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Marquee Engineering for completion of design engineering services for the Community Center HVAC Replacement Project Phase 2, the proposal. A copy of the proposal is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, the Finance Officer Tax Commissioner is hereby authorized to pay Marquee Engineering an amount not to exceed $20,200 for completion of the Community Center HVAC Replacement Project, Phase 2, Design Engineering Services as outlined in the proposal. Section 3, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 12, 2025. Any questions or discussion tonight? All right, seeing none, we will see this again at our next meeting. Next, we have up ordinance number 13, 2025. This is a first reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 13, 2025, an ordinance accepting a proposal under the Ohio Department of Transportation Cooperative Purchasing Program and authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Pavement Technology Incorporated for the 2025 annual street program Pavement Rejuvenator Project. Whereas the Ohio Department of Transportation Cooperative Purchasing Program has advertised and received bids for the purchase of machinery, materials, supplies, and other articles and services that participants in the program can utilize. And whereas the city of Springdale, the city, wishes to maintain various streets throughout the city through the application of Pavement Rejuvenator, and whereas Pavement Technology Incorporated was the lowest and best bidder through the Ohio Department of Transportation Cooperative Purchasing Program for the labor, equipment, and materials to complete the Pavement Rejuvenator project with a proposal amount of $79,429.24. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1. The City of Springdale accepts the state's specifications for Pavement Rejuvenator and agrees that Pavement Technology Incorporated is the lowest and best bidder for the labor, equipment, and materials to complete the Pavement Rejuvenator project for the city in the amount of $79,429.24. The project. Section 2. The mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Pavement Technology Incorporated for the labor, equipment, and materials for the project. Section 3. The finance officer tax commissioner is hereby authorized to pay Pavement Technology Incorporated the sum of $79,429.24 for the labor, equipment, and materials to complete the project. Section 4. Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 5. This ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance, first reading of ordinance number 13, 2025. Any questions or discussion on this ordinance tonight? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. We will see this again at our next meeting. And then last in ordinance, we have ordinance number 14, 2025. It is a first reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 14, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with TEC Engineering Incorporated for the provision of professional services for the operation and maintenance of the City of Springdale's traffic control system. Whereas the city desires to enter into an agreement for the provision of professional services for the operations and maintenance of the city's traffic control system, and whereas the city has accepted the proposal submitted by TEC Engineering Incorporated and seeks to enter into an agreement specifying the terms and conditions for the provision of the professional services. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1. The mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with TEC Engineering Incorporated for the provision of professional services for the operations and maintenance of the city's traffic control system, the agreement. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2. Council, consistent with the agreement, the finance officer tax commissioner is hereby authorized to pay TEC Engineering Incorporated a monthly flat fee according to the following schedule. May 1st, 2025 through April 30th, 2026, $4,700 a month. May 1st, 2026 through April 30th, 2027, $4,700 a month. May 1st, 2027 through April 30th, 2028, $4,700 a month. Section 3, the finance officer tax commissioner is hereby authorized to pay TEC Engineering Incorporated for all other services performed outside of the agreement pursuant to the terms contained therein. Section 4, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 5, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, this was the first reading of ordinance number 14, 2025. Questions or discussion this evening? Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to let you know that Mr. Williams is still in attendance with us this evening. If any council members have any specific questions about this contract change, just to point out specifically, the monthly charge here is the same as we're paying currently. Just the hourly rates for the different project engineers is what's increasing.
Thank you. And we've had a long-standing relationship with TEC Consulting, and they've been very good partners from everything I've worked with them on. So I appreciate your willingness to work with us and maintain our costs. Things are getting expensive everywhere, and we appreciate that. All right, any other questions or discussion on ordinance number 14, 2025? All right, seeing none, we will see this again at our next meeting. All right, next up on the agenda is old business. Is there any old business that anyone on council would like to bring forward tonight? Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not on council, but I hope you'll let me address this anyway. Just for residents and updating for council, and Mr. Anderson knows this, in terms of the development over there at the formerly Forest Fair Mall, just an update. Myself and Mr. Anderson were at the Forest Park public hearing before their city council meeting this past Monday, March the 3rd. That was really just there for them to approve the change in the zoning, and they did approve that. They had heard the concerns that the city has. There were approximately 10 or so, give or take, residents that were present that live back in Beacon Hills, and they're well aware, Forest Park's well aware, Fairfield's well aware of our concerns. And I think they're genuine with regard to it. At the same time, some of the things that have been asked from the city in terms of moving the development further west to give more of a buffer for those residents there with those approximately 40-foot tall buildings, that's probably not going to happen. They do seem committed to try to do what they can in terms of actually putting a wall up there. If you've been around there or you live back there, they had a wooden fence that's dilapidated. And then the ask as well, and Mr. Anderson showed them some photos, is to improve the foliage there, put some trees there, and give a real buffer. So just an update from, we had discussed that the last two meetings, want council to know where that is. They haven't gotten to the point of a final development plan, but as that plan stands at this point, they're going to push forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that update. I can say that Mayor Hawkins, speaking both at the shared planning meeting, and I attended and spoke at those meetings as well. I did get the impression that they were trying to be good partners with Springdale. They recognize that our neighbor is right there. And while they're not required to do some of the things we've asked them to do, they do generally seem like they want to be sensitive to those residents' concerns. So I do appreciate that, and I want to say that out loud publicly, that I appreciate Forest Park's willingness to work with us and hear our residents. They had sent out notices to our residents about the public hearing as well, and gave them the opportunity to come to their meeting and share their concerns, and they did. So I was both impressed with our residents coming out and speaking, and I was also impressed with Forest Park's willingness to hear what was being said. So it does bode well to have a good relationship with our neighbors that way. All right, any other old business that anyone on council or administration would like to bring forward? All right, we'll move on to new business. Is there any new business anyone on council or administration would like to bring forward? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to meetings and announcements. Ms. Sullivan-Wisecup.
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission will meet in these chambers next Tuesday, March 11th at 7 p.m.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that the State of the City address will be March 26th at 7 p.m., March 26th at 7 p.m. at the Rec Center. Opportunity for residents to come out and hear some of the things that are going on in 2025. You'll hear from all of the administrative department heads, and you'll also have the opportunity to ask them questions afterwards independently when that is over. So again, March 26th at 7 p.m. at the Rec Center. Also want to celebrate a few folks. We have Coach Henderson's fourth grade boys came in second place in their rec league tournament. And then we had our fifth grade boys, coached by Joshua Johnson, won their league tournament and this past weekend, so celebrating them, and then as well as our Princeton Vikings ladies basketball team is playing in the state semifinals this weekend, so we wish them well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Health will meet Thursday, March 13th at 6:30 in these chambers.
Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Zoning Appeals is scheduled to meet in these chambers at 7 p.m. The 25th of this month. Waiting to see if an application has come in, but we're scheduled for that day. Thank you, and go Vikes.
Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just an announcement. We will be migrating over to our new web domain effective tomorrow. So our new web address for our city's website will be springdaleohio.gov. And I would encourage everyone to go check out our new website, kind of got a refresh. If you have a link saved under springdale.org, it will still point you to that direction, so no worries there. But I want to invite you to go check that out tomorrow. It provides us a little more functionality than our current website does. And those of you who have subscribed to different notifications, we will be auto-enrolling you into those same notifications. But for those of you who have not subscribed yet to different notifications, there's a section at the very top that's titled Get Connected or Stay Connected. And if you click on that, it'll take you to a little page where you can put your web address or your email address in there, and then sign up for the different types of notifications that we push forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. That will also change email addresses at some point too. People will start seeing email coming from the new domain, so just don't be surprised. It's not a spoof or a hack. But if you're ever not sure, be sure to call administration. We can tell you if the email you got was real.
Correct. Those are slow rolling out. So hopefully within the next 2 months, we'll have all employees and council members changed over to the springdaleohio.gov. It's a better cyber security method that we are taking part in, just so residents know that, as Mr. Anderson stated, it is a legitimate municipality or municipal employee reaching out.
And largely it's because the .gov address is controlled differently, so it makes it easier for us to secure things. All right, Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Civil Service Commission will meet tomorrow, March 6th at 2 p.m. adjacent to these chambers.
All right, that's it for our meeting's announcements. Next up is communications from the audience. This is the final opportunity this evening. If anyone would like to address council for any reason, this is your opportunity. You simply come forward to the podium, state your name and address, and you'd have up to 5 minutes to address council on any topic. At this point, the floor is now open for communications from the audience.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Daniels again, and I am a former resident of the Village of Lincoln Heights, and I want to thank Mayor Hawkins, so Mr. Anderson and Mr. Gleave supporting the village when they had their town hall meeting when the neo-Nazis invaded Lincoln Heights. So thank you for your support. All of our kids go to Princeton, so I think it's important that we all work together. So thank you again on behalf of the Village of Lincoln Heights.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. We've spoken on that a few times now. It was a tragedy what happened, and we're certainly available if there's, as time moves on and Lincoln Heights figures out the best ways that we as neighbors can help. We're certainly open to working with them in any way that we can. All right, the floor is still open. I'm sorry, Mr. Jacobs, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just want to mention thanks everybody for coming out, and especially kudos for staying through the entire meeting. I know listening to me read legislation was probably not on your to-do list, but thanks for coming out and for staying for the long haul.
All right, the floor is still open for communications from the audience.
My name is Cole Spradlin, and I live on 870 York Haven. I do want to say thank you for you all for considering everyone that was here tonight. I am personally not affected, but I do want to say thank you for considering the opinions that were raised here, and Mr. Vanover for raising the opinion of those who could not make it. I also do want to give a brief progress report on the pool. I know we're a little too early. This time last year, we were freaking out about it, and I do want to say we are in a much better place. Only pressing thing we have right now is that we are still trying to find a pool attendant manager, so they are the ones that run concessions and the pool gate for SwimSafe. We're still trying to find one. Right now I have one candidate who has interviewed with SwimSafe, and I hope she makes it. That's all.
Thank you, Cole. All right, the floor is still open if anyone else would like to address council.
Tony White, 1047 Castro again. I just wanted to thank you guys for listening to us and voting the way you did. Pretty sure I speak for all of us that are here when I say thank you. And seeing some more proactive law enforcement in that neighborhood as far as doing traffic stops, looking out for people that, failing to yield would be beneficial. And I think once you start doing that, you do that for a week, I think the word will get around, and I think traffic will be a little better. So, thank you, guys.
Thank you for those comments. And I will say, we definitely have said we appreciate you coming out tonight when we're in the vote. As we make those changes to the parking spaces and the roads, just know that you don't have to wait for the public hearing to reach out to either your local rep, Mr. Vanover, or any of the at-large, or any of us, regardless. If you have concerns or questions, we're certainly here, administration's here to hear those. It doesn't have to be a one-time conversation. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. White, I hear what you're saying in terms of enforcement, and no, first off, I think we have a wonderful police department, and folks are trying to do a lot of different things, and so over the last probably 24 months, Heritage Hill has been a focus, one from the nail thing, but it's been a focus, and that's really been a quality of life thing. So we are on that. We're trying to do what we can. In general, though, again, it's been stated, appreciate folks coming out, sharing their opinions, and not just that, with some of the things that have gone on, really appreciate the way folks come out and share their opinions, the decorum that's been used, and it makes it easier for everybody to hear the feedback. You know, every elected official up here wants to have the input from the residents. We all, together or individually, may or may not make everybody happy all the time with regard to what they're doing, but everybody up here is going to try to make the decision they think is the best thing for the city. And so when folks come through and respectfully give that input, that's exactly what everybody wants. So we appreciate not just you being here, but the way that you're giving your input. So thank you.
All right, the floor is still open for communications audience. Second call. Third and final call. All right, at this point, I'm closing communications in the audience. We'll move now to recap of legislative items and legislation still in development. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council, as you review legislative summary, item 1, 2 separate ordinances to establish Ledrow Street and Castro Lane between Benedict Road and Ledrow Street as one-way streets was addressed by ordinances 8 and 9, 2025. They both received a second reading. Both were defeated with 1 vote in favor, 6 opposed. Item 2 was addressed by ordinance 11, 2025, receiving a first reading, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Verdantis for preliminary design engineering for the Northland Boulevard and Kemper Road intersection modifications and shared youth path project. Item 3 was addressed by ordinance 12, 2025, receiving a first reading, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Marquee Engineering for design engineering for the community center HVAC replacement project phase 2. Item 4 received a first reading, and it was addressed by ordinance 14, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with TEC Engineering Incorporated for the provision of professional services for the operations and maintenance of the city of Springdale's traffic control system. Item 5 also received a first reading, ordinance 13, 2025, an ordinance accepting a proposal under the Ohio Department of Transportation's cooperative purchasing program and authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Pavement Technology Incorporated for the 2025 annual street program pavement rejuvenator project. Item 6 will receive a first reading at our next meeting on March 19th. It will be ordinance number 14, 2025, an ordinance accepting a proposal under the Ohio Department of Transportation Cooperative Purchasing Program and authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Strouser Construction Incorporated for the 2025 annual street program Crack Seal and Cape Seal project. Item 7, a resolution adopting a thoroughfare plan for the city of Springdale, will receive a first reading at our March 19th meeting. All other issues or matters are forthcoming unless administration has anything.
Anything else from council or administration for our next meeting? All right, see nothing. You all set? All right, then all that's left before us is item 15.
Move to adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.